ahead of time, so I think everyone has had a chance to review those minutes. Is there any discussion, corrections, additions that anyone would like to circle back on?
The only question that I had, let's get this over here.
We've never done this before.
We had talked about it via email, was the motion that Dave had made last meeting regarding the cash in lieu of land. I want to make sure that we are 100% clear on the way it's worded here so that it is right when it goes to council.
It is correct, and it's already gone to council.
Oh, gotcha.
Ooh.
Okay.
I should clarify, it's gone to council conceptually.
Okay.
There's not been a final action taken on it, but yes, council is aware, and yes, John's memo from community development explained it as well. Full cash in lieu of land.
Full cash.
Perfect.
Yep.
Then I motion that we accept the minutes.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
All right, our minutes are approved. Tonight's first agenda item is the Schoolhouse Square 4th edition park dedication.
Thank you, Park and Recreation Commission members. We're visiting park dedication again tonight. This one we have for the Schoolhouse Square development. What we're looking at here is Highway 61, Vermilion Street, 10th Street, the Green Mill property being here, Premier Bank being down here. There is a 2-acre piece outlined in red here that was part of the original Schoolhouse Square development from 2002, the master plan for development that's never developed. We do have a plan forward to us that would construct a 90-unit, 4-story senior housing facility. And so as part of that, there would be a plat which would combine a couple of the outlots here into a single lot of record and provide us the opportunity to collect park dedication fees. So what we're looking at tonight is what method that we should use to collect these. So under the subdivision code, there's really 4 methods in which we can collect park dedication. We can have a physical land dedication, payment of cash in lieu of land, combination of those two, or having private open space facilities for public use. And so I'll go through those just a little bit here. Before I do that, over to the right here is what the proposed development would look like. So you've got 4-story building located here, parking located by it, a private dog run park to the south of it along 10th Street, and then this portion of the property that slips up to 8th Street would provide a private trail connection to 8th Street with a connection to the sidewalk via some stairs that would be open seasonally, be closed during the winter months. As well, there would be a connection, not shown here, but connecting into the sidewalk system into the remaining portion of Schoolhouse Square in this location, and then can feed them off to other places within the city. So taking a look at our comprehensive plan for planned and existing parks and trails, it's kind of hard to see this, but the development's located right here, not shown as a location for any parks. The only thing that really comes adjacent to it is this enhanced trail system located along 10th Street here. So when you take a look at park dedication, if you were to take land, when you run through the formula on that, you could generate a piece of land that would be 0.73 acres, essentially about a third of the development site. So if you take a look at the development site as it is here, the park dedication would take about a third of it, leaving the construction of the building as we see it today would be significantly compromised. The footprint would not fit in there. When you take a look at look at the comprehensive plan, we haven't designated any parkland or improvements within that area. When you take a look at connections to existing park facilities within the vicinity, you do have regional trail facilities in close proximity here, that there'd be connections out to the sidewalk system to the north, to the south, so that you can provide those trail connections. When you take a look at park space, probably the closest park would be Roadside Park, which is about 2,000 feet to the west across Highway 61, and other parks to the east, as well as Kennedy School to the east. This is a senior housing facility, what's termed an independent living senior housing facility. So Playground usage for the population here probably isn't the most appropriate type of use, but certainly other recreational facilities, walking, other things would probably be more in the wheelhouse. We take a look at park dedication if a land adjoins an existing park or school. This one does not. Could the parkland serve as a buffer between commercial and industrial? You take a look at this site, the whole site kind of transitions between commercial and residential on this site, so that's already taken into consideration. Any unique topographical features? Not really on this site. It was mostly mass graded when the school was demolished back in about 2002. So what we're recommending tonight is cash in lieu of land, the payment of that, based upon not identifying any community facilities within the comprehensive plan and not meeting any of the other requirements for park dedication. What the payment would generate would be $99,000. This would be based on the 90 units being proposed at $1,100 a unit. So we would have $99,000 paid into the Ward 1 Park Fund that you could use for park facilities in the future. And so that's the recommendation that I have moving forward tonight. Some other maps of the property, let's give you an idea of what it will look like eventually. This is the view from 10th Street here. And other views from the site looking to the north. There'll be a nice overlook here, looking north towards the river. This is towards from the townhome areas, looking westward, and some other views of the site here. So we did have some of the land use actions related to this before Planning Commission last night. They recommended approval of it, and all of this is planned to go before the City Council coming up on Tuesday, February 18th. So I can stand for any questions.
Which ward is this in?
This would be Ward 1.
One? Okay. And that Ward 1 includes the riverfront area?
Yeah,
Does it go down towards that area? Or is
Yeah,
it
basically east of Vermilion Street.
east? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the riverfront is in Ward 1, but also has its own designated park dedication fund as well.
Okay.
The dog walking area, I'm assuming, is just a spot for them to utilize for the dogs to use the restroom type of thing, not going to be open to the general public?
That is correct. It'd be open just to the residents of the townhome, or the apartments there. They had originally planned that as a parking lot. When we further reviewed it, we didn't feel the need for that much parking on the site, so they came up with this use.
And the one thing that I saw you failed to mention was the rooftop thing that really does eliminate the need for any kind of park space for the residents. Obviously, it's in a mostly established neighborhood, so the parks that are meant to service that area, it's not going to impact anything with adding the 90 units, because they'll have their spot on the roof as well, too.
Correct.
Is there any other parking, John?
Say that again?
Is there any other parking or just the outdoor parking there?
Got it. Yeah, parking on the facility, there's going to be 61 units on the first floor here. So the way the development goes, it's kind of like a walkout lot on a residential. This end is a little bit lower, so you drive into the parking over here, and this end towards the west is a story higher. So most of it would be underground parking, and then there's about 40 or 50 surface spaces shown here on the outside of it.
This seems pretty straightforward to me. I think we motion to accept the proposal of the cash in lieu of land.
Is there a second on that?
I second
Okay.
the motion.
It has been moved and seconded that the commission accepts the cash in lieu of land option for this. Any other further discussion required? Okay, all of those in favor, say aye.
Yes.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes for cash in lieu of land.
Thank you.
Got it. You're right, that was like 30 seconds.
You can just manipulate it here with the arrows.
Our next agenda item is the Vermilion Falls Park. Karen?
As a pointer.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks. So yeah, my name is Karen Schick. I'm the senior ecologist at Friends of the Mississippi River, and I am really excited to be here tonight to show you the Vermilion Falls Park Natural Resource Management Plan that we have completed for the park. And I just want to go through kind of the highlights of the park and the management plan, and then I'll give you our suggestions for what we think can be done there for restoration and management. So back up a little bit, and I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but you don't have to read all the text. This is some articles that Cindy Smith pulled up for me. And I discovered that this park was actually formed because of the 1965 flood that came through the Vermilion River, and it just washed out through the Vermilion Gorge. And there was a group of citizens that said, hey, we got to do something about this. We need to protect this area here. And that group of people then became the very first Parks Commission in the city of Hastings. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then it was just a few years later that they purchased the land on the south side of the river across from the mill, and that became the park. That was like in early 70s, late 60s, something like that. And so this is the park outlined there on the left, and it's interesting. It's got a lot of other parks around it. So the Vermilion Linear Park is just upstream. Old Mill Park is just downstream, and then if you look at the map on the right, there's even other parks beyond that. So further downstream is the Hastings SNA, and the Vermilion, or the Gores Pool WMA, and a few other parks. So it's really just like this whole corridor of natural areas there. And so Friends of the Mississippi River, we've actually worked in a lot of these areas. Hastings River Flats, Gores WMA, the Vermilion Linear Park, Old Mill Park, Hastings SNA, we've worked in all these sites, and the Hastings SNA. So, or the Hastings St. Cooley SNA. So we're really familiar with this whole area, and this park was kind of left, like we hadn't touched it yet. And so it was just a few years ago that we were able to start to pull together some funding to start looking at it. So, and I was really surprised, because when I had first gone through that park and I had just done a cursory look of it, and it's like, it's just buckthorn. And but then when I actually explored it a little more, there's some really interesting things about that. So I'm happy to share that with you. So in our management plans, what we do is we'll look back historically and see what was there. And so when we look at the maps that were put together at the time of European settlement, they went throughout the state and recorded the vegetation every mile interval. And so it gets us a pretty good picture of what was around at the time. It's not totally exact because it's mile intervals, but we can surmise that it was, they suggested that it was oak savanna. So their notes show is basically an oak savanna. And if you look at the tree growing on the right hand there, it's this very large oak tree with spreading branches, and that's also indicative of oak savanna, and this is a pretty old tree. So that seems like it's, at least part of the park was probably oak savanna. We also look at historic aerial photos, and so this is from 1937, and let's see, I don't know how to use here we go. So the park itself is down here, and I left this as kind of a larger scale map just to kind of show the amount of development or lack thereof in the city of Hastings. So it's kind of isolated by itself on the fringe of town at that point. Not really a lot of development around it, so it's still in a fairly natural state. And then as the years go by, I don't know that it was ever really used very much for anything in specific. I think it was probably mostly just used as a place to come and view the falls. I didn't find really any evidence that it was farmed. Or other kinds of agriculture or industrial uses. So, the railroad went through there, so that was to some extent some industrial activity. But anyway, so what you can see over the years is that the trees are growing in. So there's just more and more trees and woody vegetation over time. We also look at the soils, geology, and sensitivity of the groundwater. So a lot of the site has highly to very highly erodible soils on it, especially because of the slopes. It's kind of a loamy sand soil, and right now there's really no erosion happening because, or there's no major erosion because it's well vegetated, and there's not really any like paths cutting through the hilly areas or anything like that. It is very high sensitivity to groundwater pollution. Again, it's not really an issue because there's not really anything happening there. There's no causes of pollution at this point. So, and then this is showing sort of the topography of the site. And what's interesting here is how many of you have actually been to this park and explored it? So, the gorge, the topography ranges from I don't remember the numbers are, but it basically is about an 80-foot elevation change across the property, but most of that is happening in the gorge. So roughly 50 feet, 50-foot drop at the falls itself and in that gorge. But what I didn't know when I first went to this site was that there was a second gorge at the site. And this one has a similar drop, elevation drop. But it doesn't really carry much water. There's a little bit of water down at the eastern end of it, and there's some culverts that drain into it, so probably carries some water during rain events. But it's basically kind of like walking through the Vermilion River Falls without the water. So it's kind of a really neat experience. If you haven't been down there, it's kind of otherworldly with these columns of limestone, and I'll show some pictures of that in a minute. So. We pull all that together, information together, and we do vegetation surveys, and then we kind of map out what the existing vegetation is. And basically what I found is that there's a maple basswood forest over here that's in pretty good condition. And there's oak forest, Mesic oak forest all along the river. It's in pretty good condition, meaning that there's a good representation of native plants, and there were invasive species everywhere, but it wasn't too bad in these areas. And there's an oak forest over here that was also pretty nice. Most of the rest of these areas pretty heavily invaded with buckthorn and other species. You can read through all of this. These are some of the vegetation surveys, and there were actually like 6 different areas that I surveyed. So took detailed notes on all the vegetation out there, but kind of what it boils down to is that the invasive non-native plant species are our primary concern. Various, mostly buckthorn and a couple other shrubs, honeysuckle. And then there is some trash debris out there in some of the ravines, and then there's the erosion potential, which isn't a major concern at this point. And then there were some rare species. There's we actually knew that there was this kittentail out there. It was on the records with the DNR, but had never found it, but we did find it. And then there's kind of some interesting plants. This one here is called walking fern. It has these long tendrils on it that anchor down into the soil and create a new plant, and then it walks that way. So that is actually a plant that I seldom see. I've only seen it in a few other places in the metro. So it's just kind of a fun one. It's unusual. And this over here is the kittentail. And then we had a prairie skink. We had a volunteer event out there and found this little skink. And so after we pull all that information together, then we kind of look at what we think the site could become and how to manage it to become that. And so essentially we think this area probably was oak savanna historically, but I think it's too far grown in now with trees, but it would be a nice just oak forest. And then the maple basswood forest would remain as it is in the oak forest over here. And then this whole area on the west side, most of that would probably could become oak savanna. So, and I guess this part in the middle is oak woodland. So then we get to look at some of the pretty pictures. And so this is that maple basswood forest and the limestone formations in there. And There's just a little bit of trash down there, not much, but people get creative with things that they decide to throw out. And there was a little bit graffiti down there as well. And then this is along the river, the maple bass, or the music oak forest along the river. And this is one of the interesting things here is this plant here, it's an evergreen, it's called Canada Yew. And I seldom find this in the metro area also because deer love it. And, but it's so rocky and it's difficult access here, so they tend to leave it alone. And it's just full of that. The ground cover out there is just very diverse, beautiful, a lot of natives. And you can just tell by looking at it, it's like, oh, that looks like a nice woodland area. And this is just a trail that was built out there early on when the park was developed, along with the overlook at the top. They put in the trail, and I think the pavilion came a little bit later on. And then this is in that same area along the river. This is one of the buckthorn trees that's growing down there. Pretty good size. So there's buckthorn everywhere, like I said. But and then this is that dry oak forest that was also in pretty good shape. You can see the understory here. It doesn't have a lot of buckthorn. This is one of the white oak trees. You can see the size of this thing. And this was actually just to the east, so it's probably on the Betts property. But it was just giant. Degraded oak forest, you can kind of get an idea of what some of that looks like. That was choked with buckthorn. Bare soil over here indicating that earthworms are basically kind of causing that. And then this is some more of those more degraded oak forest areas, but you can see these beautiful oak, large mature oak trees and those spreading branches again. There's this culvert that comes in, and again, there's some trash debris that was like sort of old stuff that's been there for a long time. And then there's this sign out on the south side of the property that somebody thinks that it's not your property, but it says state property, keep off, but whatever. This is that south ravine, and this is the far western end of it, so it's kind of where the ravine is just starting, and so this is where it's more degraded, a lot of buckthorn, and also a lot of debris, and old debris in there. And then this is at the overlook, and this is one of the giant oak trees that was there. This is a kitten tail that we mentioned earlier. And these tiny little pockets of prairie vegetation, just native prairie stuff that has persisted in these little openings. And so we know that it was there, and so we want to kind of help that along. So last fall, we got a little bit of a start on doing some restoration out there. We had some volunteers come out, and we had contractors cut the buckthorn and treat it, and then the volunteers hauled it out, and then the city came and gathered it up and took it away. So this was basically what it looked like before along the trail, and this is afterwards. You can see that really opened things up, and you can start to see the trees. And so we want to keep doing that and make some more progress with that. So we put together a task table, kind of an overview. We have basically like 3 phases that we kind of foresee for the project. So the first would be these areas that are in blue on the map, and that would be mostly invasive woody removal. There would also be prescribed burn, because these areas historically would have been burned, not all of them, not the maple basswood forest. But the burning just really helps to get rid of the seedlings, like the buckthorn, and help to rejuvenate the native vegetation. And then there would also be some seeding. We'd throw some native seed down in those areas and start to get that established. We think at this point, well, I'll come back to that in a second. So the second phase would be then the woody removal in the eastern side. Sorry, I always say east when I mean west. This whole western side of the property. And then the third phase would be the grassland area and starting to restore that to prairie. So these... So kind of a long-range project, depending on how the funding goes. So at this point, Friends of the Mississippi River has applied and received funding that we could use for this site. We don't have bids yet, but we would probably be able to accomplish most of the Phase 1 tasks, we believe, at this point. So that's basically it. We just want to acknowledge our funders. The Tecla-Carpent Estate helped us to get the management plan completed and some of the restoration work, as well as the city and our volunteers. And then the Outdoor Heritage Fund is the state funding that will, help us get started with the restoration. So, more pretty pictures and any questions?
I think this is great. It sounds like a great plan. Any ways that anybody could get involved to help out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so Friends of the Mississippi River, I didn't give much introduction about who we are, but so we are a nonprofit organization in St. Paul. Are people familiar with who we are? And one of the things that we do is we do land protection. So like the Hastings Sand Coulee, we help to get that protected into the state ownership. And then we seek funding to actually do restoration. And then along the way, we also have a group of people, or some of our staff members are dedicated to getting volunteers engaged with the site. And so we would plan to have probably some brush hauling events, and possibly a planting event. We try and get people involved as much as we can, especially at a urban site like this where people are, yeah.
So how do people learn about those timetables as far as when they're needed? Is there a website? Is there
Yeah,
Twitter?
we have a website. We have a membership list that we send out notifications to. We contact the city. The city would always know when we're having an event, and those events can get posted on the city website. And I think those are the primary ways that the word gets out.
And I'll just add a little bit here, if I may. Thank you, Karen. The ask tonight is for commission to support this natural resource management plan, and some of that information is in your packet, as well as support for the upcoming 2020 work plan, 2020 to 2022 work plan. So that's the action item that's on the table tonight. I would add too that the city partners with Friends of the Mississippi River quite a bit, and correct me if I forget any of the parks, but so Vermilion Falls Park, Vermilion Linear Park, Old Mill Park, Hastings River Flats Park, and I'm trying to think of other Friends of Mississippi River parks within actual city of Hastings
Yeah,
Park.
I think those are the only city parks that we work in, and then there's the state parks.
Lake Rebecca.
We haven't done anything in Rebecca.
There was some tree plantings along the old beach.
Oh, okay.
That might have been. But at any rate, we work with Friends of the Mississippi River quite a lot, and they are fantastic at what they do. You can see the results on some of the projects that are out there. Old Mill Park is a very good example, just across the river, with what used to be mowed turf grass is now a native plant habitat, really. And then the same along Vermilion Linear Park. And phases of Vermilion Linear Park restoration are continuing as well. So if you're ever along the bike trail out there or driving along Highway 46, 47, you can see that work as well. But yeah, just wanted to add a little bit.
I can just add one little thing to that too, because that kind of plays into like why we decided to go with Oak Savannah, not just because it was there historically, but that's the primary reason, but Oak Savannah is actually one of the most imperiled plant communities in the state. And so to have an opportunity where we can actually restore it is really unique and special and unusual. There are very few places left anymore that have that kind of structure with those big oak trees. And so along with that habitat then there are a number of rare plants and animals that depend on that, and they're rare because there's so little habitat left. And likewise, prairie is also critically endangered in the state, and most of the prairie species are declining. A lot of the prairie birds are declining because there's so little habitat left. So any opportunity we can get to include that in our restorations is wonderful, so.
So, Chris, this might be a question directed more toward you. The Vermillion Linear Park, as discussed previously, was really not utilized space. It just, nobody would go, you wouldn't go play ball there, you wouldn't go play catch, frisbee, whatever, because it just wasn't accessible. So the restoration there is perfect, it looks great. My question with Vermillion Falls Park, though, is what kind of utilization are we looking at now that will this change how it gets used? Because I see people in the grassy area around the pavilion all the time. I see them, in that, along the street there up to 61, changing. Is that going to change? Is that still going to stay an area where people can still utilize that space?
Yeah, Karen, could you go back to one of your maps that shows the area of impact for the projects? Yeah, that last one should
This
do.
is like,
Yeah, so Commissioner, if you can, and Karen will point it out here, there's the parking lot. That's the high-use recreation area. That piece of it is pulled out of the restoration part. So what's out there and proposing to be a part of this restoration work is the only thing that exists within that as a recreation opportunity is really the trail corridors and/or off-trail walking and hiking, which is absolutely acceptable. So similar to Vermillion Linear Park, there's people that walk through that, and certainly we want people doing that, exploring that, getting to know these sorts of habitats. But yeah, the developed rec areas are outside of this.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that. It was, the whole park is about 25 acres, and we focus just on the areas that are not that, turf, mow turf and kind of recreational area, and that's about almost 20 acres.
And I feel like you queued that question up for us perfectly. That was your
There
intent.
might have been a reason behind
was
it, because
your
I didn't hear it
intent,
mentioned.
for your phase 1 of the plan, what does the timeline on that look like? From once you start to finish the restoration?
That's like restoration is never done. But our funding will be. So so it'll be about 2-3 years of
That's
that
a pretty
initial.
long
Yeah.
taking.
Yeah, I mean, even then, what'll happen is you'll get a big flush of seedling buckthorn that'll come in, and so in another few years, that all has to get managed again. But as you deplete the seeds that are in the soil, then that decreases over time. And
In other words, the community can help reduce the cost by getting out and doing the work.
pull those buckthorn seedlings, yes.
I suppose we need an official motion on this then too, don't we?
Official?
Ben, you want to flip?
Yeah. What's the motion for?
So in the action requested. There you go.
It's a motion to support. I can't call a motion.
All right, so I motion to support the National Resource Management Plan developed for Vermillion Falls Park and support ecological restoration management work for 2020 to 2022.
Is there a second for that motion?
Amen.
Craig, do you first?
Oh, that's good.
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
do we want to have any further discussion on that? All in favor? A.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Aye.
The commission has your full support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
All right, Chris, you're up with this list.
Let me get there.
Department updates.
Yeah, that's generally why I wrote them down for you, because there's quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, and Commissioner, my intent was not to necessarily read them verbatim for you, but to give them to you as a part of the packet, and certainly the general public can find these on the city's website if they would like to read them as well. I can hit some of the highlights though. 2019 Emerald Ash Borer Treatment Program. This is the treatment program where there's two components of it. The city solicits a not-to-exceed price, so we solicit really good pricing for residents to treat their boulevard trees and private trees.
Thank you, Karen.
And again, property owners have the responsibility to maintain boulevard trees in front of their property. So if you have any questions, they can certainly call our office. Rainbow Tree Care was our 2019 vendor. They treated over 450 trees here in Hastings, so good job, Hastings. Keep it up. That really is unexpected results for the past 3 years. Hastings has come out and really done a lot of good work. And these are just the numbers from Rainbow Tree Care. We don't have numbers from other vendors that work in town. So there's certainly other vendors that do work in town, and people, if residents, if they have smaller trees, can treat them with some over-the-counter treatments, if you will, that you can get from a Gerton's or an Ace or a Terry's or whoever. And then the Parks and Recreation Department, we treated another 150 or 175 trees within parks and public spaces. So still tackling that. It's not time to let up yet, so keep on going. And tying right into that, we have hired an individual that will be joining us on Tuesday the 18th as our new Parkskeeper Forester. So that's we're looking forward to having that individual on board. The People Movement Plan, again, we've discussed this a little bit. It's similar to a pedestrian bicycle plan, but it's really about moving people around Hastings, non-motorized. It's a little bit different than a traditional ped bike plan. Really are focusing on all modes of travel, non-motorized, and sidewalks and trails and corridors and gaps and pedestrian crossings, what facilities are there, what facilities need improvement. So there's this massive effort in really analyzing what's currently a part of the infrastructure, identifying those gaps, and developing recommendations and an implementation plan as well. So that effort has recently kicked off. So we have a steering committee. We will also have a variety of stakeholder meetings and some focus group meetings as well. So certainly this commission will be a part of that. We'll be invited to join those, and presentations will be coming to this commission as well. This is part of a grant that we received from the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership. So it's called SHIP. And really that effort focuses on again, pedestrian movements, non-motorized movements, and specifically for target populations, seniors, children, and those that are underrepresented here in Hastings. So we're going to have a broad reach when we gather this information to make sure that all of these target populations, and really we want participation from everybody in Hastings if we can get it. So if there's an opportunity to participate, your neighbors have an opinion, they want to get involved, point them to us, get them involved. So that's kicking off. And we've got a couple of trail projects in 2020. One is a budgeted project off of General Sieben Drive between 15th and Highway 55. That'll be a reclaim project, that pavement section there. The condition of that pavement is very poor and was rated some of the worst in our system, so we're going to tackle that in this year's budget. Along with that, we're working on the MRRT in conjunction with the county. We have some funding from them to spend, and we're replacing about 3,300 feet of existing 8-foot trail going to a 10-foot trail. That just went through City Council on February the 3rd. We'll also be working on a Isabel Park master plan. I'm still waiting for the consultant to provide me with a fee estimate for that, but have had some discussions with them on what that process might look like. Again, it's going to be a planning effort in preparation for a project in a couple of years. So we are going to be asking the community again to get involved, specifically the neighborhood around there, but more so, and this commission has talked about it, how do we make these parks destinations within Hastings? So what is going to draw somebody from the west side of town to go to the east side of town and visit this park? So we're going to be looking for some creative ideas. It may look nothing like it looks right now. It could wind up looking exactly like it looks right now. We're going to go through this process and get input and really put our noses to the grindstone and see what we can do here. So it's going to be driven out of community input and ideas, though. So again, bug your neighbors, get them involved.
Hey, Chris, when do you
Sam.
expect that kind of planning to get kicked off for the Lake Isabel?
I should have a fee estimate within the next couple of weeks, and once we get that, we'll start developing a strategy for how we're going to go about this planning process. I would anticipate it to be a 6 to 9 month planning process
Okay.
from start to finish, and don't want to leave anything out. So with the idea for this is to have the master plan done in 2020 for a 2022 project.
Got it.
We won't have a plan done, and our council won't have enough time to kind of digest what could be the possibilities out there. So I can't turn it around from 2020 planning to a 2021 project with the way that our budget cycles work and all of that. So I want to make sure that everybody is well aware of what's going on. There's a fully developed plan. We're ready to go. And then as we look towards 2022 budget season, we can have that kind of in the hopper and ready to go. And if there's any sort of refinements that City Council wants to see or whatnot, we can do that. But
Perfect.
fully
Thank you.
intend for a 2022 project on that. And then, as we mentioned a little bit, Vermillion Linear Park restoration work, going to start into phase 3 work. It's a 27-acre, mostly the grasslands, kind of the spillway that's out there from east to west, which has been historically like a brommy grass, which provides absolutely no wildlife habitat. And I think our Public Works Department mows it once a year because we've got to keep the woody vegetation out of there. So we're going to restore that into a natural species, a natural kind of prairie. Again, keeping woody species out of there. And we'll be doing some tree removals of non-desirable species, elm trees, box elder trees, buckthorn trees. There's a few others that are out there as well, but that work should be kicking off here pretty soon. We just had a little bit of a pre-con meeting, not pre-con, a pre-bid meeting earlier this week. So that continues, and there's a couple of more phases with that to actually go through and touch all of the acreage that is in Vermillion Linear Park. Yeah, and just keep that process going.
Awesome.
Will that remain still a spillway, just the
Yes.
vegetation there is changing?
Yep. There's no structural change to the spillway, just the vegetation that's in it will be different.
Any trees going to be planted?
Not in the spillway.
Prairie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's that spillway functions, right, as an overflow for the Vermillion River. So we cannot plant any sort of woody species inside of that because that would impede flow if that structure was ever needed to mitigate a flood.
How about along the trail that goes along there? I know there's a good amount of trees on that trail already.
Yep.
Is there any?
No additional, there'll actually be some removals out of there.
Okay.
What kind of things will be planted?
Native grasses, wildflowers,
For the bees?
all stuff that's good for desirable species. Yes,
The bees.
pollinator friendly,
Pollinators,
absolutely.
that's what I wanted to hear.
Mhm, absolutely. Absolutely. And intend to, yeah, that's already going on. We know that. The Vermillion Falls that Karen presented on tonight, With this commission's recommendation now, that will take to council on February 18th
Awesome.
for their adoption. That's about it.
Well, since we know that Dave's gonna end up watching this, I hope you feel better, Dave.
Yes, feel better, Dave.
All right, is there anyone have any further discussion about tonight's topics? Oh, okay, is there a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
Sure, I'll motion to adjourn.
Anyone want to second that?
Okay, I second that.
All right. Tonight's meeting is adjourned. We will be meeting again on March 10th here in council chambers.